More than 150,000 people took part in the latest Share the Dignity survey. Now, that's Australia's largest body of data on periods. The survey went deep into what it calls the core factors and data that contribute to high levels of period poverty and period shame. To talk through its extensive findings, I'm joined today by the founder of Share the Dignity, Rochelle Courtenay. Rochelle, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you for having me. I love to talk about periods.
Who doesn't? And that's exactly what we are talking about today, the bloody big survey. Before we get into the findings from this latest report, what is the survey? What's the scope of it? And what are the kind of goals of this one?
The Bloody Big Survey came about back in 2021 when we did our very first survey. We had 125,000 respondents and we found out that 1 in 5 people were going through period poverty, and that is when somebody is unable to afford the very basic of essentials. So we decided that we would do it every 3 years. When we brought about the Bloody Big Survey in 2024, we had 153,000 responses. So look, what we found is alarming. To be honest, I thought that the state of period poverty would have gotten better, but it has stayed the same in some areas and gotten worse in others.
How do you compare these findings overall? You know, you say you're concerned that things have gone backwards or not made progress between 2019 to 2023. What are the more alarming figures in the latest results?
When we brought about the survey in 2021, we advocated that access to period products should be available for any girl participating in school. And so there has been provision of period products in all high schools in Australia, in most states and territories, and then some in primary schools. So I figured that the problem would have lessened a little. And I am shocked to see that the problem is the same. And for those who are in higher education, in TAFEs and universities, that problem had got worse. So we're going to allow kids to go to high school and give them period products, and then we're going to send them off on their really toughest journey where they've probably just started to move out of home, they're working 2 jobs, they're studying, and they don't have access to period products. And that's a real flaw that I hope to get fixed before we do the survey in 2027.
So the idea there being that even though we have had progress in terms of access to period products in schools, in primary schools and high schools, that there's this gap that exists for young people that's kind of a forgotten sector of young people in our society.
Absolutely. And this is not a one-person solution. This is about how we can all work together to make sure that no person misses out on a day of education, no matter what level they're in. And I'm talking about making sure that it's available in every primary school as well. When these stats show us that girls as young as 8, 9 and 10 are getting their period, then we need to be providing period products. We need to be making sure that there is a sanitary bin in toilets at that young age. And that education, I think that was one of the other really shocking stats that we found in the survey, was that only 15% of people felt like that they were adequately educated around menstruation. We're talking about periods. We're talking about something that affects us every single month. And I would hate to even think about if we asked men and boys whether they were educated about menstruation. Now, those little boys that are not educated end up being somebody's father, boss, friend, colleague, and they have no understanding around menstruation. And that's what I really want to change in the next 3 years.
So it's not only the findings on period poverty, access to period products, we're also talking about a need for reform in the education system itself to help with awareness and understanding, not only access to those physical products.
Absolutely. I believe that menstrual equity is around equal access to period products, whether you can afford them or not. So even if you've had I've had 7 million period accidents in my lifetime, whether I'm at sport with my girls and they're at netball, or whether I'm at work, there should be access to period products in a bathroom in a dignified way.
That idea of dignity in access to period products is a really interesting one that I want to hone in a little more on. There's this statistic from the latest survey that's found 77% of TAFE and uni students found it difficult to buy products, and this other statistic around improvising products or period products. What does that mean? What does that tell us, that stat?
Yeah, I think the improvisation is what is exceptionally scary. So if they're using a tampon for more than 4 hours, we're at risk of toxic shock. It's a health issue, right? But it's also like a mental health issue. Have you ever had to be sitting in a meeting and be thinking about whether you need to be changing your pad and tampon? You're not concentrating on what you need to be concentrating on, right? That's an anxiety issue that no woman should ever have to face. And so the fear of leaking, if you look at the other stats, 55% are missing work because of their period. The highest reason they're missing it is because of fear of leaking. If you're talking about sport, 68% of girls missing out on sport, it's a fear of leaking. It all comes back to a solution of provision of period products in a bathroom, where that then takes away that massive fear.
What are the kind of repercussions of the scale of women missing out on school and work, not just emotionally, physically, for their futures? Why should people care about the economic impact of this too?
$9.6 billion is the loss to the economy, Australian economy, because of periods in Australia. And if we came back to the whole fact around menstrual equity, it is about provision of period products. It is about education. It is about removing the shame and stigma. So what we're asking for is that we have now got an education hub on our website. So if you're a dad with a daughter and you have never been educated, there's a downloadable flyer there for you to sit and have a conversation with your daughter. Actually educate yourself. If you're a brother and you've got sisters, then you can educate yourself. And there's also a piece around workplace. What does that mean for you as a boss or a colleague to know? And that kind of information has never really been readily available. So we're asking people, now that we know better, we need to do better. And so provision of period products in workplaces should be a given.
The first time you ran this survey, 2021, we were, of course, at the start of this kind of cost of living crisis we now find ourselves in. Now that we are well and truly in the thick of that crisis, what did the latest survey find out about those pressures?
Yeah, I think in this survey, we really wanted to know, because we'd already been hearing that period poverty wasn't just affecting those that were living below the poverty line, and which is why we put the household income into the survey. So we had over 400 responses of people in the 200,000 bracket, and we still found that they were living through period poverty. And that is because probably their mortgages are so much higher, the cost of electricity and fuel, and unfortunately women are putting their health at the back burner, instead of putting food on the table. And they're probably not giving up the things for their children, but they're certainly giving them up for themselves.
Yeah, I think that was certainly a stat that surprised me in the survey, that, these quote unquote high income groups were also experiencing such high rates of period poverty in the cost of living crisis. But as well, as I'm sure the last survey found, disadvantaged groups are still worse off when it comes to period poverty. What did the survey find about trends in disadvantaged groups in 2023?
If I was to summarise what is happening in the transgender, Indigenous menstrual health, those with a disability, they're all sitting in that high 70 to 80% who cannot afford the very basic of essentials. That's not okay. What would have happened if Share the Dignity wasn't around? This collection will collect our 5 millionth packet of period products. Do you know what I mean? It makes me really sad that we've come so far and I feel like we've done a really good job, but that's the stat that's coming out of our survey. It hurts my heart.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be shocked to know that, a country like Australia that we consider to be, so wealthy, so lucky, that so many people could be struggling to afford the very basics every month. I did want to zero in a little bit on postcodes, because I know that was a new element of your data collection this time around. So what did you find out about the locations of people struggling the most, and why was that something you decided to include this time?
I think it was really important for us to capture the postcodes. When we did the survey the first time, we just simply asked people what state they lived in. So finding out which postcodes the problem was greater in and lesser in will help us to work with each council region. And I believe that it is the council's role to help us to ensure that there is menstrual equity for their constituents, right? So for us now, it's really important to go back through the 500 plus councils in Australia and to work with every single one of them by looking at what does the state of menstrual equity look like in their council region and what is it that they want it to look like in the next 3 years.
What can we do in terms of immediate reform? What needs to shift as soon as possible in order to get the dial moving here? You know, there's discussion around how, you know, remote communities, remote First Nations communities have face some of the highest prices in terms of what it costs for them to buy a packet of pads. You know, I've heard $20, for example, compared to around $7 in metropolitan cities. What can we do to change that now so that it's a different conversation in 3 years that we're having when the next report comes out?
Yeah, look, I believe that everybody knows their local councillor. Download this report and send it to them and sit down and have a conversation with them. This is about how we all play a role in ensuring menstrual equity in the country, right? I have already met with the Federal Minister for Education because there needs to be an educational reform. I have met with our Federal Minister for Sport, for Women, for Health. I have tried to meet with every sports organisation, so Football Australia, Tennis Australia, Rugby League Australia, all of the different organisations, because I don't believe that menstruation should hinder any girl playing sport. And so what does that look like in each one of those codes for sport? It's about having the conversation. I don't believe that there's a person in Australia who wouldn't be empathetic to hearing that another woman is using socks or newspaper or watered up toilet paper to deal with their period.
You touched on sport there, and I did want to talk about that. You know, the Olympics are on right now, and periods in sport is actually something I've been thinking about more and more, you know, watching these athletes at the elite level and thinking about, oh God, imagine if you had your period and you were doing this. Do you think there needs to be more conversation around periods in sport? Do you feel like maybe it's all a little bit too behind closed doors at the moment for anyone to really understand the scale of it?
Yeah, that is a really good question, because I also think periods have been a topic of conversation that no one ever talks about. Like, we had a female prime minister. Did you ever hear her talk about, oh, you know, God, today I've got my period? Have we ever heard anyone in politics ever say, you know what, today I'm just doing it tough, I've got my period?
I know, but can you imagine the stigma then that would surround them?
Right. But how do we can't break that stigma if we don't have that open conversation. So yes, while the Olympics are on, it'd be amazing for somebody to get their period while they're competing and say, you know what, not having a great day because I've got my period. Until people are brave enough to have those conversations, we won't see real change.
Wow, Rochelle, thank you so much for your time today. I just want to finish on maybe a more hopeful note and ask you, you know, in 3 years' time, pie in the sky, you've met with all the lawmakers in the country and everyone is won over and convinced. What is your goal for the next survey, your hopes and dreams?
So I have this movie that plays in my head. That's what I always say. I have a movie that plays in my head that in every library in Australia, that every council has installed a vending machine, that provision of period products are available in every place that somebody gets an education. So whether that be primary, high school, TAFE, university, apprenticeships, and that provision of period products are absolutely accessible in every hospital. And then we've had an education reform where boys and girls are educated from as little as grade 4. Every workplace must be providing period products. You will be in a rare workplace if you don't. That's my goal. That's my movie.
I'll be at the premiere. Thank you so much, Rochelle.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Daily Aus today. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to us if you press follow, if you're watching it over on YouTube, if you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple or something else on your phone, we'd love you to subscribe, follow, rate the episode. Any sign that shows these platforms that you really like what you're hearing. We'll be back again with another episode tomorrow morning.